Hands up if you want taxes to go up. Yeah, I didn't think so. But that's a suggestion for Ontario from a report for the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario. It's released a report which suggests the province increase the gas tax this year from 14.7 to 23 cents a litre. And while it would be painful, it would raise a lot of cash for infrastructure. And to find out more, I am pleased to be joined this morning by Harry Kitchen, who did this report for the RCCAO. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning.
Now, why did you decide to look at something like this?
Well, it's not a new idea, nor is it a novel idea. I've looked at issues around financing roads and transit for a number of years now, and have done a couple of fairly large reports, one on my own in 2008, another I co-authored in 2013, talked about the same issues that I discussed in this recent report. But what's happened now, it's become pretty apparent to me there are a number of things. I mean, quite frankly, I don't see how the province is going to be able to balance its budget without raising taxes. People can argue they've got to cut expenditures, and my bet is there's not a lot in there that can actually be cut at the end of the day. And so when you start saying, well, how are you going to raise revenue? Well, it seems to me one of the easiest ways to do it is to take a tax that we currently have, and if you can directly charge the people who use the service for the service they use, it seems to me that's the easiest, most reasonable tax to use. And I think in the case of financing roads and transit, and there's quite a body of literature on this that argues in support of fuel taxes, used quite extensively in the U.S., and it seems to me that we simply have to move in this direction.
Now, you had suggested hiking it from just under 15 cents to 23 cents a litre. And how did you reach those numbers?
Well, I'll tell you what, the tax rate, the current rate of tax, which is 14.7 cents on motor fuel, provincial tax, not federal, right. And the tax on diesel is 14.3 cents. If they were set in 1992, if we took the rate of inflation from 1992 to the current time, the tax, if it had been increased on an annual basis by the rate by the increase in the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, we would be at 23 cents now. So my argument, I didn't know what number to choose. I mean, if you're going to raise the tax, what number? What's magic number? 5, 10 cents a liter. A number of studies have come in and said 5 cents a liter. Some have said 10 cents a liter. And I thought, what's the best rationale? So I simply said, well, let's suppose it increases by the rate of inflation. And that would put it up at 23 cents in 2015.
Yeah, that also brings up a pretty good point that we haven't seen a hike in that tax in 23 years now?
Since 1992.
Wow. I wonder when you factor in that, would that not end up adding more cost to some of the products that we consume?
Well, it probably, yeah, I think that's true. You can't deny that. It's probably going to lead to an increase in the price of certain goods and certain services that people use. But it's also true that any tax is probably going to do that. Even general taxes, which are not like income taxes or sales taxes, which are not based on a specific service, they inevitably lead to more arguments from at least the labor side to increase the wage rates to compensate for the increase in the taxes they pay. So I think you can make that same argument for everything. It just seems to me that the question then becomes, which is the best tax? And if you're looking at it, and if you're looking at financing a service such as the use of roads or transit, then it seemed to me the strongest argument is let's ask those who use the service to pay higher taxes for that service. And that's basically the premise on which the study was done.
Harry Kitchen is joining us this morning. Did a report for the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario, which suggests an 8-cent increase in the tax rate for gasoline per litre to help pay for infrastructure. And, a lot of this was about not necessarily about paying for infrastructure, but also about reducing congestion. How will this help with congestion?
Well, I mean, the empirical studies that have been done, a number in the U.S., not many in Canada, but a number of studies have looked at the extent to which if you increase fuel taxes, what does it do to driving behavior? And what it basically suggests, if you raise the tax, let's suppose we just to pick an arbitrary number here, if you raise the tax by 10%, the empirical study suggests that it will cause the amount of vehicle use to fall by between 6.7% and 12.3%. So there's no question there is a cause and effect there. Raise the tax, leads to lower usage, and leads to reduced congestion. And in some cases, the level of congestion, particularly if you go into large metropolitan areas, I'm sure there's a lot of congestion around Ottawa, but there certainly is a tremendous amount around Toronto and Hamilton and the Niagara and the Golden Horseshoe. And there have been studies done by international organizations, actually, that have talked about the loss in economic activity that's caused by congested and overcrowded highways, and what this is costing the interior economy in terms of reduced output. And it's pretty dramatic, actually.
Now, would this also be an incentive to push maybe more people, gently push them towards electric vehicles or other options?
Well, I think it's doing it. If you take a look at some of the reports that are coming out, particularly out of the U.S., it's doing it. And what was it, just last week, Kia said that they're going to set up new stations in all their stores across Canada where if you have an electrically driven vehicle, you can plug in while you're there and recharge it. So the move is underway. Now, having said that, what you can see is that if you increase the gas tax, those people are not paying for the use of roads. So this is why I say this is a bit of a short-run measure. It's to get us through for a few years because you're going to get more of these non-fuel burning vehicles on the road, and that's when you have to move in. It seems to me you've got to move into some kind of charge per kilometer of road, like tolling charge of some sort. Because if you don't, if you keep the gas tax there, then the non-fuel cars get a free ride, basically. And the fuel-driven cars are paying for the road. So I see this as a short run. I call it short run, 5 to 7 years. It'll take that long probably to get most tolling systems up and in place, and could do some a little faster, but that's probably what it would take.
Are you talking about like the tolls on the 407, or are you talking about something different?
Yeah, tolls. You could do. There are a variety of tolling. I mean, one of the easiest ways to go is to take the high occupancy vehicle lanes, a number of which there are around Toronto. Of course, you know, with the Pan Am games on, some of the lanes have been along 401 have been converted into high occupancy vehicle lanes. You could take those, and what's done in the States, where they went to HOV lanes and found out, you know what, there's not a lot of traffic using these HOV lanes, and that's because a lot of people are single-car drivers, quite frankly. And so what they've done is they've started to put tolls on them, and they can vary the tolls by time of day, level of congestion. They can do it in a variety of ways. And they're basically just simply say, you know, if you want to use that road, you can use it. You want to use that lane, you can use it for a fee. And people are doing that.
You know, of course, Ontario has also talked about bringing in a carbon tax, signed that deal with Quebec and California, and I wonder how that factors into this.
Well, you know, quite frankly, I think you can look at this notion of increasing the fuel tax. You can effectively look at it as a carbon tax. If you take British Columbia, for example, where they have a carbon tax, and they've had one for a number of years now, the carbon tax on motor fuel is about 6.67 cents, and I'll say roughly 7 cents a liter, and on diesel fuel, roughly 8 cents a liter, and they've had it in place for some time. And talking about, I mean, but they do it as a proper carbon pricing policy. They put it on all fossil fuels, and they apportion it back and figure it out on, so much per liter at the pump. Well, I would simply say that if you increase the gas tax, as I've suggested, it's quite frankly very similar to a carbon tax, but it's only applying to motor vehicles on the roads. It's not applying to other sectors. So a full-blown carbon tax would have to be applied to a lot of other sectors as well.
Oh, all right. And what do you want for people reading this report, what do you want them to take away from this?
Well, I'm hoping that they can put some pressure on the politicians. I mean, I really think we have to move forward. My view is that the province is going to have to raise taxes somewhere. And the question is, which tax or taxes should they use? And I think this is one that does make a considerable amount of economic and fiscal sense, and would argue that. The interesting thing is, one of the things that often comes up here, and this is on the attitudes, how do people react? Well, I did a report which was a much bigger report in 2008, which essentially recommended the same thing. And then I redid it with a co-author in 2013, which essentially recommended the same thing. In the period from 2008 to 2013, we took a look at a change in attitudes. And in 2008, there was an incredible amount of negative comments on the report I did. By 2000, and some of it was actually in editorials in newspapers and a lot of columnists. But by 2013, the same papers were supporting it, the ones that had criticized. And the general attitude, there have been opinion surveys done of drivers and what they want to do. And if you look at them over time, For the 2013 report, we actually summarized the change in attitudes. There was quite a dramatic change in the attitudes from 2008 to 2013. People were moving in the direction of accepting the notion that you have to have some form of user fee type tax to finance roads and transit. So I think the attitude's out there. I think there are naysayers who say, don't raise my taxes. They say that all the time. Don't do this and don't do that. But you know what? We got to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but raising taxes not exactly the most politically positive thing to do.
Well, and it's not, it's not the most positive. But we aren't always led by politicians. I mean, we're led by a lot of politicians who will be the fastest to argue against tax increases. Mm-hmm. And then when they run these deficits, they can't figure out what the hell have we done. We've got a deficit now. We told we weren't going to raise taxes. We got a deficit. Maybe they got to start selling the positive sides.
Good point. All right. Well, Harry, I want to thank you for joining us this morning. I very much appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye. There goes Harry Kitchen as he just completed and released this new report for the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario, and basically calls for the gas tax in Ontario to go from 14.7 cents to 23 cents a litre. So up more than 8 cents a litre to help pay for infrastructure. And he's basically saying, you know what? The cupboards are bare. You need this. It has to be done. You keep putting it off, then congestion still continues to become a problem. And this is the only way to deal with it. And over the last 5 years, he's also found that there's been a bit of a change in attitude among Ontarians about taxes, and just basically feeling that, you know what, that's the only way to do it. In terms of revenue, that's the only way you're going to get it in, because they just don't have it right now, and it's something that's needed. Very much appreciate him joining us this morning. Still to come before the end of the show, we're going to talk to Animal Justice. They're concerned about the Calgary Stampede. 4 horses had to be euthanized this year. And we'll talk about that and about some of these Running of the Bulls events that happen in southern Ontario as well. I'm going to talk to the Canadian Centre of Policy Alternatives, as they found that Gatineau, just across the river in Gatineau, the second best place to be if you're a woman in Canada.